Morning. Good to see everybody out today. I don't want to say too much about yesterday's football game, but I rather enjoyed it. Hunter was texting me during the game, and he wasn't enjoying it as much as I was, but Andy Conley was texting me. Lots of people were texting me. Yeah, nobody beats us 18 times in a row at home. We're Kentucky football, so maybe 17, but not 18. Is Steve in here? I'm going to talk about Steve a little bit. Okay, good. We can say whatever we want. Steve is somewhat of a miracle worker. I don't know if you know all about Steve, but he is a craniofacial and maxillofacial surgeon. I don't know exactly what the differences are between those two. I think one's the top and one's the bottom part of the face. But he trained at Emory University in Atlanta and then Vanderbilt. And he worked in Australia at the Royal Adelaide Hospital for a while. And he developed stage 4 melanoma in the late 90s and actually was responsible for developing his own treatment, which he was able to reach remission via that treatment. And now he helps others with their cancer, maybe some folks whose other previous therapies didn't work. And he does a great job with that, and I think has quite a bit of success. But the most remarkable thing is that he was actually able to get comments and audience participation from an auditorium class at Creve Hall the last couple weeks, which is remarkable. So I'm hoping, I don't have a medical degree, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, but I'm hoping to have some comments from you today. So I'll start off with a question. What is the best concert you've ever been to? There's Steve. Everybody wave at Steve. We just talked about you, Steve. I think you did. The best concert you've ever been to. Some of my notable concerts. My first concert was Weird Al in 1984 or 5 on his Dare to Be Stupid tour. I've seen Weird Al 3 times in 3 different venues with 3 different people, actually. Nickel Creek was a big favorite of ours. We saw them actually before they hit it big at a little free concert in Chattanooga, and they played bluegrass, and they were just outstanding. And then we saw them when they were big. We saw them on their farewell tour, and then sort of their reunion. No, we really mean it. This is our farewell tour. Groups do that. I think Alabama's been on a farewell tour for like 10 years. Maybe Kiss as well. But we've seen Harry Connick about 5 or 6 times. Always enjoy his shows. When I was a teenager, my mom let myself and 2 of my friends drive down to Starwood Amphitheater from Kentucky to see Def Leppard. I think that was about 1987. So that dates me a little bit. One night, Carrie and I went to a free concert in Henderson, Kentucky at the John James Audubon Park on the Ohio River. There was a railroad bridge in the background. It was sunset, beautiful sunset, great bluegrass music, Chatham County line, and the Biscuit Burners opened for them. It tells you what kind of show it was. But, and I had I think it was a grilled pork chop sandwich in hand, sitting in a camping chair, perfect temperature. That was a memorable concert. But my favorite's probably, there's a group called Dawes, and they played at the Ryman. And they're not the best singers necessarily, but they do have some great harmony. The band was incredible. The lead singer was running around like crazy, giving it all that he had. And it was just a great experience, great concert. But I'd like to hear from some of you. What are your favorite concerts? Maybe you can show your age a little bit. Yes? Okay. Okay. He took his daughter Anna to her first concert, the Decemberists at Ryman Auditorium. So some of you know who they are and some of you don't, but they're pretty good. Who else wants to share their first concert? There's got to be some Neil Diamonds in here somewhere. Yes. Oh, Neil Diamond for you. Okay. All right. I nailed that one. Yes. You've never been to a concert in your life? That's sad. That's very sad. If somebody gets an extra ticket or wins something on the radio, would you look her up and invite her to the show with you? Anybody else want to share? Oh, Bob Seger from Brother Sane. Didn't know he was a rocker, but yeah, Bob Seger. One of his greatest contributions to music was the Eagles, who got sort of together with him. But yeah, Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame members. What else? Anybody else want to share? Tom? Billy Joel at at where? MTSU. Wow. I didn't know Billy Joel ever made it to Murfreesboro, but that's good. But Tracy was there too, he says. All right. Wasn't quite as memorable to Tracy, though, because it was trumped. But these concerts, there are various reasons why we like these shows, right? Sometimes it's just a pure musical experience. Sometimes it's just the energy that the band brings, and then if they can both be together on that stage or in that venue, it gets to be pretty memorable. Carrie and I went to go see Celtic Woman once, and the musicianship was incredible, the voices were incredible, and we left at intermission because it was like they were robots. It was so polished and so good, and there was no, hey, Nashville, we really love you. It was just like you were watching a DVD. And in spite of the technical perfection of that show, I didn't enjoy it as much because there wasn't the flavor, the personality, I didn't feel like they were giving energy to the crowd. But I want to spend a little time talking about the worst concert I've ever been to. I told Carrie I was going to do this. We were out and about yesterday. I said, tomorrow I'm going to use an illustration of the worst concert I've ever been to. And I gave her time to ruminate on that and guess who it might be. And so she had a guess of a show we saw at the Ryman several years ago, and I said, no, that's not the one I had in mind. And I thought, when I tell her what it is, she's going to tell me that's awful or punch me. But I told her it was a 6th grade band concert of one of our kids, and she was not upset at all. She's like, oh yeah, that was bad. So when Mama thinks that the concert was bad, it was pretty bad, right? But there was more honking and squeaking than I've ever heard in my life. If it's possible to play to 4 different beats and 3 different tunes, they nailed it that day. But there's a huge difference between a good concert and a not so good concert. And if you think about our salt and light, we are instruments in the hands of God, or we are players in His orchestra, if you will. And there's something to be said for all of us playing the same tune at the same time from different angles with different flavors, giving it our energy in a way that will engage the world. There also is a danger that we will play our own music, we won't be in time or in tune, and that our concert will be something like the 6th grade band concert that I spoke of. When you think of an orchestra, you think of all different kinds of people, men and women, black, white, brown, yellow, playing strings, horns, percussion. And you think of the conductor up there with his stick or her stick, waving it around furiously, telling which sections they need more of and which sections they need less of, and maybe twisting it in subtle ways that the crowd maybe doesn't realize, but the orchestra does because they're so advanced, they know the nuance. It's phenomenal how all these people can be together and make one sound, right? Sometimes when you go to a symphony or an orchestra or a philharmonic, and I don't know what the difference is, somebody can educate me afterwards. It's a lot of instruments playing together. But sometimes when you're there, it's just, the audience is just captured by that music, by that time, and is just enraptured, and oftentimes standing ovations at the end of numbers, and the conductor's all sweaty, and everybody's giving it their all. And then sometimes you have an orchestra that is not as overt, right? If you think about your favorite movies, There's a soundtrack to that movie, and there's a large chance that a lot of that music is classical in nature, performed by an orchestra. And maybe it subtly affects you. It doesn't stir, this awareness, this enraptured feeling, but it's more subtle in shaping your emotions, preparing you for scenes or making you feel the depth of a sad scene. The music can really get you. And I think that's another way that our influence is like an orchestra, is that sometimes we have the world's attention. They're looking us square in the eye, waiting to see what we're going to do. And we have to play the song that our Father conducts for us. And then there are other times that the world isn't squarely looking at us, but we're influencing that world by shining our light, by spreading our salt a little bit at a time, wearing away at those stone hearts that Satan has placed in the chests of so many. So we're a bit like an orchestra. There are all kinds of people in the church, and we have different talents. We have different interests. We all play from the same sheet of music. We all need to pay close attention to our conductor. And again, sometimes our influence is spread overtly. Sometimes it's a little more subtle. And both of those are needed, and both of those are valuable. We've talked so far in this class, just as a manner of recap here, about the metaphor of salt and light, to be seasoning, to be illuminating, glorifying to our Father, and the things that we need to do to be effective. Steve's talked about some of the tactics of our enemy and the stakes that are in play as we are out in the world trying to be an influence for good and change the lives of our neighbors for good. And I want us to examine some people in Scripture that are salt and light. And that shouldn't be hard to do, right? Because Christ said to his followers there in the Sermon on the Mount, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world." He didn't say you should be, he said you are. So people all through the ages who have faithfully followed God, those who are mentioned in Hebrews 11, those that aren't, those whose names are given, those whose names are not, they're all salt and light if they followed God. So there are some orchestra-related themes, I think, that I want us to talk about today and look at some people that fit those molds. First one is practice, practice, practice what you preach. I saw, I don't know if it's Wikipedia or not, but if it's Wikipedia, you know it's true, that the typical orchestra member practices 3 to 6 hours a day. You think about it. These are people that are already at the top of their game. They're the best in the world already. And they're spending 20% of their life or so practicing their craft, practicing their instrument, practicing their music. There's a different sense of practice, right? There's a second definition that really means to carry out or perform an activity, a method, or a custom habitually or regularly. So it's not as if we are the bass drum player in the Philharmonic Orchestra practicing our John Philip Sousa march, much to the dismay of our neighbors, all afternoon. Not that kind of practice where, I got to get this perfect, I got to be better, although that lesson would preach, right? I mean, there's a lot to that. But I'm talking about practicing what we preach, not in the sense of there's an imperfection, I have to deal with it, but being consistent, being out in the world and being consistent. There are so many reasons to consistently practice Christianity, one of which is that the world is looking at us to see hypocrisy. The devil loves to find a hypocrite, and he can use that hypocrite like nothing else. People in the world think, well, if this is the best you've got and they're just like me, why do I need all these rules, regulations, this commitment? That's one thing. And then the other thing, which is really the one I want to focus on with our example this morning, is that we never know when we're going to have a moment to be a catalyst, to create a change, to ignite a spark, to do something that is going to change the life of someone or change the life of generations to come. And I want us to look at the example of Joseph this morning. Joseph was the favorite son of Jacob. As you know, he received the coat of many colors. His brothers were jealous, and they took him, and they were going to fake his death. Some wanted to actually kill him, but they ended up faking his death, selling him into slavery, telling his father that he had died. Joseph, of course, became a slave to Potiphar in Egypt and did well as a slave and was sort of given charge of Potiphar's house. But of course, we know, due to Joseph's faith and his obedience to God, that he was falsely accused of a terrible act and was thrown into prison. How much influence can you have in prison, you might wonder? I think Joseph had quite a bit, as we're going to see. And we know that eventually Joseph rose to such a position of influence that he was able to save his family from famine, to bring his father's family to Egypt, to a very rich agricultural area there where they prospered and grew into their own nation, all in part because of Joseph. And even time, to a certain extent, is measured relative to Joseph. Exodus 1 and verse 8 says that there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And that's when things started turning a little bit sour for the Israelites. But Joseph was a tremendous example. How did he go from a prison where you would think he wouldn't have the ability to have much influence to having such a great influence on his family, the next generations to come, and on the nation of Israel, and even on us today? Well, let's look at Genesis chapter 39. You can turn there. We're going to start in verse 19 of chapter 39 and read down through verse 8 of chapter 40. After he was accused by Potiphar's wife, it says in verse 19, as soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it to succeed. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against the Lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, and the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody, and one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. And when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, why are your faces downcast today? And they said to him, we have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. I won't read the rest of it, but you remember the story. The cupbearer and the baker revealed their dreams to Joseph. He interpreted them, of course, giving the credit and the glory to God. But the cupbearer was going to be restored to his place in 3 days, and the baker was going to be hanged in 3 days. And Joseph, all he asked was that they remember him when they were free. Well, they were freed from the prison, and their lives played out just as Joseph had told them they would via his interpretation. But they forgot Joseph, and he spent 2 more years in that prison. Think about it. Being in prison, being falsely accused, being nothing but faithful. I don't think we see any derogatory words or any negative things said about Joseph in Scripture. He certainly wasn't perfect, but he was perfect in the sense that he was complete in his obedience to God. But he's in the prison. It could be very easy for him to be pouting or upset about being there. But what turned his fortune and the fortune of all those that he went on to influence. It was the question he asked, "Why are your faces downcast today?" Something as simple as taking an interest in those who are troubled. All around us, folks are locked in prisons of fear or anger or confusion, depression, rebellion. And we need to encounter those people, and we need to ask them, "You okay? What's wrong?" And we need to be sincere, and we need to listen, and we need to follow up, because we can unlock the doors to their prisons via our influence, via our salt and our light. Okay, here's where I ask you some questions, and you help me out, just as you did Steve last week. What keeps us from asking folks what's wrong? What keeps us from asking folks that obviously have a problem, obviously need some help? What keeps us from intervening? Yes? If we ask, we may get an answer, and we may be obligated to help them. And it would cost us some time, some emotional energy, perhaps. That's a heart problem, isn't it? That means you really don't care, if that's the reason that we're not asking folks who obviously are distraught if they need some help. What else is a reason that perhaps we don't ask people what's wrong? Yeah. The thought shared was that we often have so much going on in our life, whether it's things that occupy our time and keep us busy, or our own problems and our own mess, that we think we're either too busy or too broken to help. Tracy? Yeah, maybe folks have told us to mind our own business, and so we've taken that advice. Maybe that person hasn't told us that, or maybe they have. But yeah, there are barriers. We're sort of conditioned not to intervene, right? Not to stick our nose where it doesn't belong. Steve?
Sometimes what they tell you, there's really not much that you can do to help, or that any other human can do to help. And then, yeah, you're kind of that awkward, lost for words, like, oh, okay, now what do I say? Because I can't make that better.
Yeah. We tend to think, and I think we do this with evangelism as well, we put too much of a burden on ourselves. We've got to fix it. We got to fix this person. We got to fix this problem. And so we see their problem, we know enough about it to think, well, I can't fix that, so I'm just going to steer clear of this person. Sometimes the intervention, asking of the question, if nothing else, makes them realize that somebody cares about them. Somebody wants to help them. You might not be able to solve the problem. Heaven forbid you might have to just rely on God and prayer, right? Andy's talked about that in his Wednesday night class, about how sometimes it's like, well, all we can do now is pray. That's not a position of giving up. That's our starting point, right? That's how we buttress ourselves in this fight that we have. I think sometimes we're too busy to notice, and many of these thoughts have been shared. Sometimes we don't recognize their pain, and we need to be educated. Sometimes we're afraid of getting involved. Sometimes we don't think we have the emotional energy to deal with it. And sometimes we're just flat too focused on ourselves to intervene. But we've got neighbors all around us who need help. You think about Christ's interaction, and he was asked the question, well, who is my neighbor? And what story did he proceed to tell after he was asked that question? It's the story of the Good Samaritan. And those first two fellows that passed by, they were religious, they were exemplary probably in their community, but they didn't follow the example of love thy neighbor as thyself. And they didn't get involved for whatever reasons. They were busy, they had more noble pursuits, they didn't want to become unclean because they had duties on the Sabbath and whatever. God expects us to get involved. Some lessons from Joseph, in addition to those we've already mentioned, is that we can accidentally, and I've got air quotes, accidentally provide salt and light. Think about the Morton's Salt logo. Anybody know what the Morton's Salt logo is? Okay, their slogan is, when it rains, it pours, I think. So even if there's all kinds of moisture, the salt will pour. But there's a little girl in a yellow dress, I believe with a yellow umbrella, and she's got a little tube, because Morton's Salt always comes in a little round tube, right? She's got it under her arm, but it's upside down, and as she's walking, salt is pouring behind her. That's what I mean by accidentally, right? There are things that we can do just by being ourselves. It's not like we have to think every day, okay, what is my interaction that I'm going to have with this person? And that's not to say we shouldn't be intentional, because we should be intentional. We should pray about opportunities. We should look for opportunities, and when we see them, we should seize upon them. But there's some that we're not going to see coming. And if we're constantly spreading the salt or spreading the seed, we're going to have an effect that maybe we didn't anticipate. Joseph he wasn't asking these people things because they were potentially powerful men and could get him out of prison. He cared about them. He observed the fact that they were distraught and said, "Why are you downcast?" Do things all the time because it's who you are. We talked in the first lesson that I taught about start with the heart. And that's very important, because if we don't have our heart right, we're not going to do as many things accidentally as Joseph did. Another thought is that our salt and light may be dormant for a while, but it doesn't mean that it's dead, right? The influence that Joseph was going to have, he had begun in prison when he asked that question, but he had 2 years to think about the fact that, it wasn't leading anywhere. God knows the rest of the story, right? He knows the next chapter, the next scene in our story. And he knows that things will happen in his timing. Also, from Joseph, we learned that the impact of our influence, our salt and our light, may be a couple degrees removed. It may not be with the person we interact with. It could be with their family, right? Could be down the road. Could be decades down the road. We don't know. And it's not up to us to put it in a calculator and figure out what's our maximum return on investment, right? We sow. We spread salt. We shine light. We spread seed. And there is some value in being wise as serpents and harmless as doves, and some tactics, right? But we shouldn't be so calculating that we miss just shining light every day along the way. Any other thoughts from Joseph? All right. So our first one was practice, practice, practice what you preach. The next sort of orchestral example, just keep playing. I saw a video one time. I couldn't find it on the internet, so I may have dreamt it. I don't think so, though. Of somebody in a marching band who had either forgotten their instrument or it had fallen out of their hands, and they were playing an imaginary saxophone or something, maybe a trombone, as they were walking along, right? They didn't even have their instrument, but they kept on playing. They kept their place in line. They went through the motions. They did their thing. It was pretty funny video. But sometimes things don't go as we planned, as we have planned in our lives or in this orchestra that we're in. There's adversity. Sometimes our clarinet squeaks or our saxophone honks. Sometimes the audience isn't as big as we think it should be, not paying attention as much as we think they should. Sometimes the audience seems underwhelmed by our orchestra, our salt and our light. But we have to keep our eyes on the conductor and just keep playing, right? We can't let the fact that it seems like we are not having an influence keep us from trying to have our influence. Nor should it keep us from recognizing that we are the salt and the light, and we are the hope of the world as we spread God's truth. I don't think we could find a better example of this concept than that of Noah. Let's look at the charge that God gave him in Genesis 6:13 through 22, and then we'll look at verse 1 of chapter 7. Genesis 6:13, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, or 450 feet. Its width 50 cubits, or 75 feet, and the height of 30 cubits, or 45 feet. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which the breath of life, everything that is on the earth, shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be made male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing on the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. And thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. And then the Lord said to Noah, in verse 1 of chapter 7, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Sometimes the Bible doesn't give us details that we want. Many point to that as proof of its inspiration, because if man had written it, surely they would have filled in some details. Surely they would have talked about the potential 5 to 8, maybe 10 decades of time that it took Noah to build this ark. But we don't have it in Scripture. I would love to take a couple of chapters from Numbers with all the begats and the census results and exchange those for some detail about Noah and his efforts. But alas, we don't have that privilege. But God's probably got a big screen in heaven where we can watch it all on replay if we want to see or hear the story, right? But we know what happened during these decades, this long span of time. Noah built the ark. But let's just think. I don't think it's wrong for us to hypothesize a little bit. And again, audience participation here. What do you think a typical day was like for Noah between verse 22 of chapter 6 and verse 1 of chapter 7 when he was actively building this ark? What do you think a day was like?
I think his neighbors probably ridiculed him, or at the least, they would have said, what in the world is that man doing? But he persisted. He kept on persevering and doing what he knew was right. And I read years ago something that's always impressed me. There the man was, day after day after day. But Noah built the ark, and it wasn't even raining.
Right. Right. Couple thoughts there. One, Noah's neighbors probably thought he was crazy. What is this thing? And the second is that there seemed to be no need for whatever it was because it wasn't raining. And some scholars believe that it hadn't rained to this point, that there was a great mist that would come up and sort of water the earth that way, and that after all the turmoil from the flood, perhaps the earth shifting on its axis due to the weight of the water, we got more intense seasons and rain and all that. I don't know. Again, we can ask God to tell us all about it when we get there. But yeah, I think there was some ridicule. Is there ridicule for us when we are just playing our saxophone or our flute or our bassoon in God's orchestra, tuba, bass drum, whatever it is? Yeah, there's some ridicule for us. What else do you think a typical day might look like for Noah? Steve.
Well, building on what Brother Saint said, ridicule and hostility. These people were exceptionally wicked. That's
Mm-hmm.
basis. So what he was doing, and we read he was preaching, as he's doing this. What he's doing, just like we talked about the aroma of death, Christ is the aroma of death to people who are perishing. Well, his art was an indictment that, he's basically saying, come with me, you're going to die.
Yeah.
Not a real popular message to a wicked population to start with.
All right, so Steve says that the ridicule went beyond that to hostility, because what Noah was doing, preparing this ark because of the wickedness of man, was an indictment against his neighbors. And no one likes to be told that they're evil and that they're going to perish, but Noah was a preacher of righteousness according to the Bible, and he did just that. Yes?
Maybe flipping the coin, I've never been on a mission trip, but he was serving God in a very righteous manner, and possibly the communion with God may have been amazing.
Yeah. As Noah was,
Dawn till dusk, that was pushed in.
yeah, as he was being ridiculed, as maybe, we don't know, maybe he got it halfway built and somebody set fire to it and he had to start over. For all we know, that happened, right? I don't know. But the communion that he had with God as he relied on God for his sustenance, mental, emotional, physical, that would have to be pretty rewarding. So yeah, flipping the coin a little bit, there were probably some benefits, more than just being saved in the flood, but being drawn closer to God. Yes? Oh, yeah. Tired. Yeah. Satan loves it when we get tired because then we don't think right and we don't act right. And every day. And if you think about it, if Noah was like me, when I'm starting that thing, I'm going to the gopher tree that's closest, right? That's where I'm going to start. So if you think about it, if he did that, his job got progressively harder and harder and harder because the gopher trees were further and further away. He was building higher and higher on the ark. And probably as his strength got better due to all the physical activity, he was having to do more intense labor and work. Yes? Yeah, he preached and preached for all those years. And how many people were in the ark at the end? 8. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. 8 people saved in the ark. That's where we get the Bible definition of few. If anybody asks you how many few is, the Bible says there were few, that is 8 souls saved in the ark. So we have a biblical definition of the word few. So if you tell somebody you have a few kids, it means you've got 8 kids. So be careful.
I think one of the greatest traits that's implied in this story is that Noah stayed focused on what God told him.
Yes.
He did everything, all that God commanded him.
Verse 22, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. He didn't cut corners. You know, I feel like my house is 20% caulk. Right? Do you feel that way about yours? Well, that's close enough. Get some caulk and paint over it, right? There was none of that for Noah. Yeah, there was pitch to fill in some spots, but he couldn't really cut corners. He had to do all that God commanded him. And otherwise, it wouldn't have floated, and he wouldn't have been saved. Some things I jotted down that a typical day might look like: his neighbors asking, "What is that?" His friends snickering, having to go further and further to find the next gopher tree. Asking his sons, those gopher trees we planted 20 years ago, you think they're ready? Because you think about it, it's decades that he's building on this. He was preaching. He probably got a visit from his homeowners association asking him to paint that a different color or move that somewhere else because it was in violation of the rules. His family was probably asking, when is this thing going to be done? And Satan whispering in his ear, this isn't working. You'll never get this completed. Nobody's listening to you. And you have to think that occasionally Noah would look around and wonder, what is this all for? My preaching isn't changing anybody's minds. I'm getting the same ridicule. My job is getting harder. This isn't how I expected it to go. Perhaps Noah was not having these thoughts and feelings, but I'm afraid if I were there, I certainly would have been. I want to say something that is true in my mind and probably needs some definition, but I think there's a danger in being results-oriented when it comes to our influence, if we don't have the right result in mind. You can look at Noah and say, well, all you did was save your family. Well, that's something, isn't it? It's like the little boy who walked along the beach, and there were all kinds of sea creatures that had washed up on the shore, some sea turtles, and there were thousands of them from this terrible storm. And he was getting them, throwing them in the ocean, one at a time. And somebody walked by and said, what are you doing? There are tens of thousands of these. You're never going to amount to anything. This isn't going to do any good. What you're doing isn't going to matter. The little boy picked one up and threw it in the ocean and said, mattered to that one, right? We tend to think that ours is numbers, that a good preacher is going to have lots of baptisms, that a good teacher is going to have lots of responses and accolades or whatever. It's not how it works all the time. Sometimes it works like that, sometimes it doesn't. Our primary result has to be glorifying the Father in heaven. If that is all you do tomorrow via your salt and your light, you have done well. There may not be anybody who is positively impacted by what you do tomorrow. But if you do what God says in your salt and your light, you have made a difference. You have achieved a result because your Father has been glorified. Our job is to shine. Our job is to show the way. And our job is to glorify our Father in heaven. So some lessons from Noah. Do good, period. Just do good. Just keep playing. It's like the little fish in Finding Nemo. You know, if I told you 30 years ago that a computer was going to make a movie about a fish and there was going to be a blue fish that had short-term memory loss, you'd think, well, that's not going to ever work. But Finding Nemo was a wildly successful movie by Pixar and Disney, right? And Dory, the little fish that has short-term memory loss, she can't remember a lot, but she remembers that she needs to keep on swimming. Just keep on swimming. We may look around and think, I am not cracking through at all. I'm not having any breakthroughs with anybody that I'm trying to influence. Keep on playing that instrument. Keep on keeping on. Because it takes all of us. It takes our orchestra, if you will, to have a maximum impact. And your influence may be incubating, as in the case of Joseph, or it may be just in a close circle around you. But you think about the fact that everyone on earth came from one of those 8 people on that ark. So the influence really was pretty spectacular in the end, right? So play the long game. Sometimes it feels like we're losing, but keep playing, keep doing good. And then it's also worth noting, as is expressed in Hebrews 11:7, that sometimes being light reveals things that folks don't want to see, that they want to hide. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Next week, we'll look at a couple more examples of this. But before we leave, 2 things I want to encourage this week. One, I covet your prayers for my mom. She's having surgery tomorrow. She has a cancerous tumor in her intestine, but the doctor says it's slow growing and she may have had it for years. It's the kind of cancer that people often die with and not die from. So hopefully that's all good. It's going to be a laparoscopic surgery, but there's 5 to 7 days of recovery because they are going to have to take a bit of her intestine out. So I covet your prayers for that. And then I want to echo some things that Bill said this morning about the next couple weeks in our country. And that is this. You don't have to go to every argument you're invited to this week. People are going to post things and say things that you vehemently disagree with. Shine your light and be salt. Don't be salty, right? But be salt. The devil is looking forward to the next couple weeks. I think he's going to win either way, honestly. But we have a chance, too, in these next 2 weeks to show the world that we're above this fray, that our citizenship is in heaven and our responsibilities lie there. And I pray that we'll all take advantage of those opportunities. It is time to go. You heard the bell. I appreciate your participation. It's wonderful that Steve got you all warmed up, and I hope to continue this. And interrupt me if you have a thought, because I want you to be able to express yourself, and there's great wisdom in this room to share. Thank you again for being here, and have a great Sunday.